Hello, everyone. Thank you for showing up for my masterclass on IT security, specifically me, Roger Grimes, teaching ransomware mitigation. Thanks, everybody, for showing on up. If you don't know me already, I'm the fast-talking, data-driven defense evangelist for KnowBe4. There's my Twitter and LinkedIn information if you're interested in following me. I've got 34 years of experience in computer security. I've written 12 books and over 1,100 magazine articles now. So I've been doing this a long time, been fighting ransomware since 1989, believe it or not. There's some of my books. My latest one is Hacking Multi-Factor Authentication, which talks about the 50-plus ways I know about hacking MFA. I work for KnowBe4. We're the world's largest integrated security awareness training and simulated phishing platform vendor. I love working for KnowBe4. But today we're here to talk about ransomware, how, and most importantly, early on, how a good backup alone no longer saves you from ransomware. We'll talk about the CISA's official recommendations to you for mitigating ransomware, about our specific recommendations that go above and beyond. Talk about the policies and technical controls and education that you need to stop ransomware in its tracks, incident response when you get hit by ransomware, and then going to end with Roger Grimes' special way to detect any ransomware program, no matter how secretive it is, because these days ransomware is oftentimes in organizations from 8 months to a year without detection, even though they are running up-to-date antivirus. So I'm going to talk about how you can always detect it. But we're going to start by discussing why a good backup alone no longer saves you from ransomware. Well, again, ransomware has been around since 1989, what was called the AIDS cop Trojan, if you want to look up that historical note. So it's been around a long time. Traditional ransomware, though, was kind of more like just a simple Trojan horse program, and that somehow you got tricked into running it usually, or it could be because of unpatched software. But it would execute, or you would accidentally execute it, and it would just encrypt your desktop. And that still, there is some ransomware out there that still does that today, but it's definitely a minority. Then it also started, a lot of times it'll try to spread and hit different machines. So it's trying to infect as many machines on your network before it goes off. Encrypts files and folders, and then it asks for a ransom, usually in Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency, to provide the decryption keys for you to rescue your data and files. That is what everybody knows as ransomware today, but ransomware has evolved significantly over just the last year, really since November, December of 2019, over the last year and into 2021. The trends we saw at the end of 2019 did nothing but accelerate over 2020 and are continuing to accelerate over 2021. And certainly going forward, we expect most of the same thing. The biggest change is that ransomware essentially got tired, the crooks, ransomware gangs got tired of victims saying no because they had a good backup. And they realized that the gold that they had was the access to the device and or network, that they're in with complete control of these machines. They can do anything. And they realized encrypting files and holding it for hostage was the least of the victims' worries. Now that they realized that it was the actual access into the device, into the network, that was really, the threat of what they could do. So over the last couple of years, and again, we'll talk about what happened over the last year, or just recently over the last year or so, but over the last couple of years, ransomware has really, really changed from just encrypting software. So today, a typical ransomware workflow kind of works like this, where a user is on the internet and they get tricked into running some Trojan horse file. That Trojan horse file is a smaller, what's called stub file, dropper file that gets executed, installs itself on their desktop or laptop or whatever. Then immediately it dials home. Sometimes it actually will collect all your passwords that it can find, and then it will dial home to what's called the CNC command and control servers, or sometimes that's C squared, but to the different servers that are controlling that malware bot. It usually downloads multiple other malware programs. It updates itself. It does all kinds of things. It will find out what's the latest payload, what is it supposed to do, get new functionality. It will update itself. So even antivirus endpoint detection, removal, response software doesn't detect it. And it's kind of amazing. Most dropper files that I've seen and tested, they never get recognized by antivirus or EDR software as malicious. But in the few instances where I've seen the antivirus software go, hey, this is something malicious, if I actually execute it, Within probably 15 seconds, it disappears because it actually goes up to the command and control servers, downloads new versions of itself that are not detectable by antivirus, and then installs those on the machine, on your device in multiple places, and then starts spreading around the network. Tries again to collect as many passwords as it can from your device and across the network and sends them to the hackers, and it notifies the ransomware gang of a new intrusion. Actually, a lot of times it's just notifying the command and control servers, and the hackers, the ransomware gang, is going into the admin console of their ransomware that connects back to the CNC servers that goes, hey, here's the 10 or 100 or 1,000 places we've broken into since the last time you checked. And then the ransomware many times just sits there and does nothing but check in. Like, it just updates itself like 20 times a day, but it doesn't really do anything. Maybe it spreads or something like that, but it's dwelling in the network. Again, many times up to 8 to 12 months on average, sometimes even longer than a year. I just read today, this morning, where ransomware had been into a place over 5 years and had not been detected. Although I think it's more of an outlier, but certainly 8 to 12 months and over a year is not that unusual. So then the hackers come in and they access the compromised network. They figure out, how much they're going to charge and what information is there that may be valuable to them. They steal whatever they want. And then finally, at the last second, they launch the encryption and ask for the ransom. But it's really, again, many times these hacker gangs are surveying the compromised network. They're researching the victim organization, trying to determine how much money to charge them. So a smaller, plastic surgery center is charged less than a Fortune 10 company. And they'll figure out, a lot of times I've heard they'll calculate like 2% of net revenues is kind of a generalized amount one of these ransomware groups will do. They want the victim to pay and for it to hurt to pay, but they don't want it to be so much money the victim's like, nope, there's no way I'm paying. They also are going to determine what is the data crown jewels of the organization. How does the organization make its money? What can they freeze up? What can they steal? What can they exfiltrate? They want the valuable information that company would not want out there on the internet to the public world or to their competitors. They want to find out, what can we lock up? What can we encrypt so that we cause the most amazing pain quickly? They just want to get paid. Whatever it takes to get paid is what they want to do. So they'll, again, spend time. They'll monitor emails. They'll monitor and sift out information from databases. They'll figure out what makes this company run that if we freeze up or steal would cause them to want to pay us the ransom as soon as possible. So they very frequently will exfiltrate data and emails and passwords and stuff like that. They encrypt the crown jewels and they say, hey, if you don't pay, we're going to release the information we've exfiltrated to hackers or your competitors or to the internet in general. And again, this can be all kinds of stuff that they're stealing here. A lot of times they do steal intellectual property and data and patents and things like that. They'll steal customer lists. They'll, steal customer data. But really, they'll steal everything they can, every login credential they can, even for employees. Like if think about it, the ransomware is in for 6 months or 8 months or a year, and employees are going, to their Twitter accounts or Amazon accounts to pick up stuff. And employees don't know when they're typing in their Amazon password that has access to the credit card, this ransomware TrickBot Trojan or something is picking up their password. They steal passwords to everything that everybody in the business is going to, whether it's business or or personal. And they're even picking up customer login names and passwords, knowing that customers often reuse these login names and passwords. They threaten not only the victim, but the victim's employees and customers. They'll tell the employees, hey, if you don't pay us, first of all, they say the only reason we're attacking you is your employer or the vendor you deal with didn't pay, and you need to pay us. So, we've seen many times where, like a plastic surgery center, they'll say to the patients, we have your first and your before and after photos. I've got to tell you, they're not pretty. And if you don't pay us, $1,500, we're going to release your before photos to the internet. It's pretty wild. So they'll threaten the victim's employees and the victim's customers. They'll use stolen data to spearfish the victim's partners. having these specialized spear phishing attacks that seem like they really are coming from the victim. Sometimes they are coming from the victim's actual emails, and devices, and the victim doesn't even know what's going on, or they're spear phishing using, information they found about projects, just different ways that they're interacting with different partners and customers. And that way, it allows them to get additional victims. And they'll even publicly shame these victims, even though most companies in the world today are covered by some type of privacy law or regulation that requires that they publicly report when they've been compromised. I think stats show the vast majority of them don't like to publicly report they've been compromised by ransomware. So the ransomware people will actually publicly shame them. They have websites and things like that. They go, hey, we've broken into this company, and this is what we took, and this is how much money we're asking for, and they have or haven't paid the ransom. But the thing is, if you look at these 5 things here, none of it does a good backup save you. A good backup saves you when all they've done is encrypted your files. Well, when they steal your data and say, if you don't pay us unless, if you don't pay us, we're going to release that information publicly, well, backup's not going to save you. And this has significantly increased the percentages of victims that pay the ransom. If you want to learn more about what I call nuclear ransomware, there's my 1-hour webinar on this subject alone, with lots of examples of it. And again, this started happening about November, December of 2019, and it's just accelerated. Last year was about 50% of all ransomware attacks, and now in the beginning of 2021, it's over 70% of all ransomware attacks involve data exfiltration. So that's pretty wild, right? I mean, this is just amazing. It went from, according to this is Coveware, this report, it went from less than half the ransomware attacks last year to the end of last year, it was over 70% of all attacks. And the reason why it's getting larger and larger is that, of course, these people are paying the ransom, and if it works, all the ransomware gangs are hopping on board and exfiltrating data. So it's a big, big deal. And it's such a big deal that in the U.S., our official CISA, the Cybersecurity Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. That's the largest primary U.S. government organization that's designed to protect our cyber assets and networks and devices and the internet and stuff to reduce cybersecurity risk across the nation. That was formed a couple of years ago. It had some new things, and they brought together a lot of previous organizations like U.S. CERT. You'll even see pronouncements from U.S. CERT, and they're really from CISA now. And they announce new vulnerabilities and threats. They share information, like they'll tell you, like the latest SolarWinds attack. Hey, this SolarWinds attack, this is how it occurred. This is what we know. These are the indicators of compromise that you may have been compromised by, and they'll recommend mitigations. So they really are this U.S. national clearinghouse for how to manage your risk around cybersecurity assets and networks. And they as it's indicated by the graphic below there, they focus on cybersecurity, infrastructure security, emergency communications like our 9/11 systems and stuff, and just national risk management in general. Fantastic organization. Here's like an example warning from them where they are warning about that SolarWinds supernova attack. They have this is the official information and advisories. Overall, I've been super impressed with CISA. I think the people that I've met from there are super competent folks. A lot of intelligence, a lot of I think overall, the CISA folks are better than some of the previous U.S. government organizations, and they're more focused. And, I just can't say enough. I think everybody should subscribe to what they do and to the information they try to provide. So you can go, I've got a link there to their, how you can subscribe to them, but go to CISA, go find their subscriber link and put your email address in there and subscribe to them. You'll get, on an average day, I get somewhere between 2 to 5 emails. Some of them I ignore, but other ones have really, really good information. I tell you, if anything, I probably get scared a little bit because they have such good information. They're like, here's all the top threats today. And there's always a whole lot that you're like, wow, like, I have to watch Apache Struts hit again, or Apache Druid or something like that, or Apple devices or whatever it might be. It's a really good, if you don't want to miss something about cybersecurity or the important stuff in cybersecurity, I recommend you subscribe to CISA's subscription account. Again, I've found it to be an invaluable source of information, and let me say legitimate information. They have a lot of different quick links for different things, for like cyber incident response and supply chain compromise, and including, if you look over in the top right-hand column there, ransomware guidance and resources. They have an entire portal, sub-portal dedicated to fighting ransomware. Like they'll tell you, how can you, these are their primary recommendations for mitigating ransomware. They're like, hey, make sure you update your software and operating systems with the latest patches. Hey, that's good stuff. Don't click on links or open attachments of unsolicited emails. That certainly makes sense. Back up your data on a regular basis. That makes sense. Follow safe practices when you're using devices that connect to the internet. Is there a device today that doesn't connect to the internet? But anyways, if you want to go to the ransomware portal, and I think, again, anybody attending this should go check out what they have to say, because I think it's a lot of really good, useful, official information there. And they have all kinds of subtopics. Like they've got, as you can see on the right-hand part of the screen there, they have like ransomware reference for K-12 schools, so reference materials that you can hand out to parents and teachers and school administrators, and, ransomware training and webinars. I mean, we have a lot of that. I kind of think our stuff's better, but they have the official stuff, and it can't hurt to read, ransomware alerts and statements, what's going on in the world of ransomware. Again, and I would say I reviewed the material. There's little things I can point to here and there, but I will say that as far as a government organization, I think they've done some of the best material and communication out of any government organization. I'm highly, highly impressed with what they've done, and really think anytime you work with them, it's going to be for your benefit. Here's some other things. Again, primary prevention recommendations are like, hey, back up your data, update and patch your systems. Again, I could not agree more. Make sure your security solutions are up to date. That's great, but it turns out like 80–90% of the people hit by ransomware had up-to-date security solutions. So I'm not sure how, it's not a bad thing. You've got to have up-to-date antivirus. You got to have a firewall. I just don't think it's all that useful in actually preventing ransomware, but it's still good. I love when they say review and exercise your incident response plan. Fantastic. And pay attention to ransomware events and apply the lessons learned. Fantastic. And I'm going to teach you some of those lessons today. And that's what I'm going to do next, is that I'm going to give you our recommendations about what I think you should be doing based upon actual ransomware attacks and mitigations, and things that I've heard from, our own experiences, customers we worked for, worked with, and also ransomware experts that have done literally thousands and thousands of responses. So the biggest thing I can tell you, and how I differ from CISA or some other person, is that most of them don't risk rank the mitigations. And the thing is that all the threats, the root causes, in this case, how ransomware attacks you, is different. There's certain ways that ransomware can attack you, and what ransomware does that is, significantly higher than some of the minor things in ways that it might attack you. And you need to risk rank your threats, your root causes of how badness gets into your environment, ransomware in this case, and make sure you focus on the biggest threats first. So if you risk rank your likely threats, if you do that, you're going to learn that the majority of all malicious data breaches are due to social engineering and phishing. The stats of that run all over the place. It's like I normally say, it's 70 to 90% of all malicious data breaches are due to social engineering and phishing. Other places may say only 50%. One place says 91%. Whatever the figure is, whenever it's reported, it's always the majority. So you can easily say the majority of digital breaches are due to social engineering and phishing, and nothing else comes close. The second most common cause is unpatched software, which is usually about half of social engineering and phishing. And then everything else added up all together is maybe like 1 to 10% of the risk. So in most organizations, the reason why they are compromised by ransomware or malware or hackers or some type of social engineering phishing scam or unpatched software. And those two causes have been the number one, number two reasons most years for all of the years of computers. There have been some years where like a DOS boot virus, where the recommendation was, hey, make sure you pop out your floppy disk before you reboot your computer. For a while, DOS boot viruses were a big deal. Email worms were a big deal. USB key threats were a big deal. There are things that pop in there. But without a doubt, the most common root causes of exploitation over the last 30, 40 years have been social engineering and unpatched software. And sometimes it was unpatched software was more common. Sometimes the social engineering more common. Since about 2009, social engineering has been the #1 reason, majority reason of why most people were attacked. And if you know that, and that is the truth, you don't have to believe me. I could be lying to you. I work for, Noble 4. We're a company that teaches or tries to help people fight social engineering. But just ask yourself in your own experience, if you were compromised on your desktop, your laptop, how did it occur? If you know that your company was compromised, how did it occur? If you know the reason, it probably was social engineering related or unpatched software. That is how it is for most companies. Not every company, but even when you hear about them on the news and they tell you, oh, how did Experian get compromised? It was unpatched Apache struts. It's usually social engineering or unpatched software. And you need to concentrate your efforts where your prevention mitigation efforts will mean the most. I call this a data-driven defense. I even wrote a book about it called Data-Driven Computer Defense, is that you should focus on the ways that you're successfully attacked the most and your defenses. And unfortunately, a lot of other organizations are telling you how to defend. They just tell you all these, do this, do this, do that, do this, and they're not really telling you which ones are most important in your defense. Because there are some things in ransomware are abused more often than others. Today, it's email and phishing is #1 way. Unpatched software is #2 way. It is kind of interesting that in the ransomware community, for a while, Microsoft's remote desktop protocol, either it was unpatched and got buffer overflowed, or people use weak passwords for some reason. Their password's password, and that's how they compromise this device. Well, for a couple of years, RDP, for the last couple of years, was a top way that ransomware got into people's desktops. Now, this is a chart from Coveware.com, which they're a site that deals with ransomware and ransomware negotiations all the time. I think it's a fairly good chart. I, in my other experience of looking at other companies, have never seen RDP so high, but I have seen RDP, again, either unpatched or with weak passwords, be a top ransomware cause. I've never seen it be 75% of the reasons of ransomware. That may just be Coveware's experience, but I have seen it a top cause. But even in this case, you'll see that now is that unpatched or email phishing is now the #1 cause and is above all others. And I've seen other things like, USB keys, 7%, some people say it's 7% of the cases, or, SQL injection or something like that. But what I can tell you is that out of every ransomware threat vector comparison chart I've ever seen, social engineering is #1, usually by far. Unpatched software is #2, and RDP is in there in the mix, and sometimes it's more than unpatched software, but it's starting to die. I think people finally got the idea that they can't leave RDP unpatched and exposed on the internet, or they must use strong passwords. The top threats, if I'm going to try to defeat ransomware, I need to focus on preventing phishing and patch my software and not have really bad passwords, right? That's what you should focus on. So this is what I tell you, your best defense should be, for sure, you want to have good, thorough, complete system tested, offline, up-to-date backups and restores. Most companies probably do not have this. Most companies probably have what they think is a good backup, but they haven't tested it. Like they restored one file or one folder or one server and went, hey, we're tested, we're good. But then ransomware comes in and locks up 80 systems, right? And it turns out it wasn't so. They didn't have such great backups, or they weren't offline. Like I have a lot of people tell me, oh yeah, we got our backups offline. I was like, well, can you get to them online, to restore them if you need them? They're like, yes. I'm like, well, if you can get to it online, then it is not an offline backup. And then I know people that have an offline backup, but they didn't update it in the last 9 months or something like that. So you want to make sure that your backups are always complete system backups, so that if they lock up every one of your systems, you can actually figure it out. I know people that have paid the ransom even though they had good backups, because they realized when they started to do the restoration that it was going to take them 8 months to do all the restores. So make sure that you have this good, thorough, complete system tested offline up-to-date backup and restore that can save you from the ransomware that encrypts your stuff. Most organizations don't have this. How do we know this? Because 40 to 75% of organizations pay the ransom, and paid the ransom before they did the data exfiltration. Now it's even worse. But now because of data exfiltration, and over half the cases, now it's, Codeware again said it's over 70% of the cases, a backup alone isn't going to gain you as much as it used to. So the only real defense is to stop the ransomware from accessing your environment in the first place. And everything else must become secondary to these two things, and that you got to have a good backup, but then you need to prevent ransomware from executing in the first place by stopping the way that ransomware gets into your environment. And how do you do that? Well, you need to have the best defense-in-depth defenses, right? You need to have the right policies, the right technical controls. That's your antivirus, your secure configurations, your content filtering and firewalls and all that stuff, and training, because no matter how great your policies and technical controls are, you'll always have some badness, phishing or whatever, get by those things, and then you'll end up with some type of phishing attack that the end user has to be able to recognize and deal with effectively, which is hopefully to report it to IT security and then ignore or delete it. But again, you want to try to make the best policies you can, the best technical control defenses, and best training that you can to prevent badness, prevent ransomware, detect it if it has gotten past your preventative controls, and then have early detection if it does get past your preventative controls, and then have good, fast incident response and recovery and updating of your preventative controls. If it's gotten past that, again, I've got a link to a blog link to a story on this, what I call the 3x3 security pillars, if you're trying to fight badness in your environment, and this certainly applies to ransomware. So remember, I also said you need to focus on what are the top 5 root causes of ransomware. And we talked about that before. Most of the time it's social engineering and unpatched software, and maybe RDP or something like that. So with that in mind, this should be the top 5 defenses for most organizations. Number 1, focus on mitigating social engineering. And we're going to talk more about how you do it, but it's having good policies, good technical controls, and training to fight social engineering and phishing. Patch your internet accessible software so that you can't get buffer overflowed by somebody remotely, and try to use non-guessable passwords and use MFA, multi-factor authentication, if you can. These are certainly the top 3. This right here is the vast majority of the risk. If everybody did this at home and at work, we wouldn't have much computer crime. This really is the keys to the kingdom, because this is like 99% of the risk in most organization are these 3 things. If you were effective at putting down social engineering and phishing, you patched all your software, and you didn't have guessable passwords, you probably wouldn't need most of the other stuff. But there are some other things you can do. Make sure that that your end users know they have to have a different password for every website and service, because oftentimes they will reshare their passwords, and those captured passwords on the other places will then be used to compromise them somewhere else. We're also big believers in teaching end users how to spot rogue URLs. A lot of phishing attempts have these really awkward, mischievous URLs that look like Microsoft but aren't Microsoft, or look like they're from Facebook or Twitter, but they're not from Facebook and Twitter. So you need to teach every end user how to spot a legitimate versus rogue URL. I have links there to my blog article on that, and also to a PDF that you can, I'll show you the PDF in a minute, that you can download and share to educate people, saying here's the most common rogue URL tricks. And lastly, for the top 5 defenses, using least permissive permission. So that's something all computer security people are supposed to do, which is use least permissive permissions, the least amount of permissions that are necessary for a person and a task to be accomplished, so that attackers can't take advantage. Like, you don't have people logged in as admin all the time, or logged in as root all the time, instead of that they're using sudoers or something, sudo. And that, if you have a website that it has the least permissive permissions, you'd be amazed at how many people have what's called, Amazon AWS storage buckets that have everyone full control, or everyone read all the files. Like, A lot of the attacks that occur today, it's a smaller portion than certainly of social engineering and phishing, but are just that people have misconfigured permissions on their computers, on their devices, on their websites, on their Amazon web buckets, and then attackers take advantage of those overly permissive permissions. So here it is. This is it. If you're falling asleep, I would take a look at this slide right here. If more organizations just did the first three, they'd be significantly more protected than most other organizations. And teaching your end users how to spot rogue URLs, fantastic thing to do. And then using least permissive permissions wherever possible, another great thing to do. Here is a social engineering, what we call red flags training, where you can teach your end users. This is a nice PDF that you can download. There's a link for you to download it. Click on that link and it will take you to another link that lets you download this in PDF form. But it allows you, you can hand it out to end users, email it to end users, and say, here's the 20 things that you should look at in email to determine whether or not something is malicious. It's a really great PDF to hand out there. And it talks about, getting emails that arrive late at night or with strange subjects or with, subject content disagreement or unexpected file attachments or rogue hyperlinks. Really, really great red flags training. This is a PDF I created. Again, there's the link. You can go to it, and that link will take you to the PDF. You can download and reuse and give to anybody. But it will say, here's the most common rogue URL tricks, where it's going to look like it's from LinkedIn or Microsoft or PayPal or Google, and it really isn't. So this right here is a really good chart to share with people, the red flags of rogue URLs. I think again, one of the best things your employees can be done is how to spot, bad emails, rogue URLs. Fantastic thing that every end user ought to be taught. And we certainly have a lot of good information on ransomware at KnowBe4. We have an entire portal dedicated to ransomware that has all of our free ransomware stuff, lots of free ransomware and anti-ransomware tools and guides. We have our famous ransomware hostage rescue manual. We just put out a new edition at the end of 2020. I was part of that. And that literally takes, everything I'm putting here and puts it in a written format in PDF that you can download and use. And you can use it. It has checklists, step-by-step point guides if you get compromised by ransomware. We even have some cool software called the Ransomware Simulator, a ransom as we call it. But if you download this, it actually simulates, I think today it's like 18 of the most common ransomware programs. It's not real ransomware, but it simulates ransomware, and you can see out of the 18 that it simulates, how many with your antivirus detect and remove. We are frequently told that people's antivirus software and endpoint detection response software doesn't detect any of it. And it should. That means that if the ransomware that we're simulating was able to go against their software, that, the people would be compromised. And again, I think the stat is 80-90% of the people hit by ransomware had up-to-date antivirus programs. So this is a good tool, Ransom, to learn that you can download. It's free and learn, test your current defenses and see how they would do. We have a lot of people that they think it's broken because their antivirus is not detecting it at all. And they'll email us and go, hey, we think that you're broken or you're not doing it right because my antivirus is not going off right. No, it's just the way that the real ransomware would have worked in your environment, and it just indicates, weakness. You need to stop phishing. Phishing is responsible for the majority of malicious data breaches in this world, and it's everything you can do. Anything you can do to stop phishing is what you should be doing. And it means to create the policies and technical controls and education to help stop it. I talked about that before. You want to make sure you have a secure desktop and secure configurations and not be logged in as administrator all the time. You need anti-phishing filtering software. You need up-to-date antivirus endpoint detection response software. You need software that detonates URLs and file attachments in what's called a detonation sandbox. There's a lot of software today like Office 365 does that, or Microsoft's Advanced Threat Detection. And there's a lot of vendors of these detonation sandboxes. But essentially, if someone sends you a URL or they send you a file attachment, it gets executed in this safe sandbox where they take the look to say, hey, is this thing malicious? Anybody should take advantage of that where they can. You need to implement sender policy framework and domain keys, identified mail, and DMARC, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. I've got a whole webinar on that, by the way, but those are global anti-phishing standards that help prevent phishers from using fake domains to send you email. So again, SPF, Sender Policy Framework, DKIM, Domain Keys, Identified Mail, and DMARC, they kind of all work together. If you don't know what those are, again, you should go attend my webinar, learn what they are. You should have SPF, DKIM, and DMARC enabled on your domain, so that if a phisher tries to send you an email claiming to be from a legitimate domain, it says it's from Microsoft, says it's from KnowBe4. If it really isn't from there, your email system could detect that automatically. Those are great global anti-phishing protocols, and you should have it. They're basically almost free to implement, and you should have them implemented if you don't already. It's also always good to have software that has like whitelisting, blacklisting software. You know, a lot of the vendors like Microsoft and Google Chrome will have these lists that, you know, you go to visit this malicious website and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, this website's been reported for being, you know, phishing related or something. Gray listing, that's kind of an in-between where, like, someone sends you an email, and if you have gray listing turned on, your email server will actually reject the email at first, knowing that if it's a real email server, that it will automatically resend the email in a few minutes, but the phishing spammers never do. And it's called gray listing. It's kind of dubious, but it works. Again, gray listing works by, they just reject anything that they haven't seen before. If there's a new domain that's not been pre-approved before, they'll reject that email, knowing that a real email program, a real email server will always resend it automatically, whereas the phishing email senders will not. There's a lot of software with reputation filters today, which are kind of like combination of whitelisting and blacklisting that tell you, hey, this is a good website, this is a bad website. I knew of one vendor that looked for any domain that was in email, being sent an email to them. They would look to make sure that it wasn't brand new, and any domain that was less than a couple of days old, they just automatically rejected the email. But they had to script that because there's no software that does it that I know of. Application control programs, which we'll talk about more in a minute, that allows you to control what software is or isn't running on a computer. That can give you, that is actually a great anti-phishing defense. Again, we'll talk more about that at the end of this talk. And all kinds of stuff. As a matter of fact, if you want to know what's everything you can do to prevent phishing from being successful, I made a webinar out of it. It's like 100 slides long. It's longer than this presentation, but we created a webinar out of it. We just released an ebook out of it, which is pretty cool. So you can go download the webinar if you'd like to hear me speak really fast for an hour. I cover, 100 pages worth of, hey, this is what you should do to prevent phishing. Or if you like to read it, we have our 50-page ebook guide, comprehensive anti-phishing guide that you can download and use. And then incident response. This is what you do when you've been hit by ransomware. Priority number one is you want to stop the spread, right? So that is, oh my God, I've been hit by the ransomware. A lot of the ransomware, most of the ransomware is going to try to spread and hit more servers, more computers. What do? A lot of times it means you turn down your internet, or you turn down and disable your routers. You kill your network traffic till you figure out where the ransomware is. It's a tough thing to do, especially when you're trying to run a business. But if you're trying to minimize the damage, you're trying to stop the spread of the ransomware, one of the best things you can usually do, not always, but usually do, is shut down your network and or at least the internet at the very least. You want to stop the damage. So if ransomware is encrypting stuff, sometimes this means turning off machines, disabling the network, whatever this means. And it's going to mean different things to different times, to different people, depending on the ransomware family. Getting to know what the ransomware family is that's attacking you is one of the most significant steps you can get in your response priorities. But the idea is, you want to stop the spread throughout your network. You want to stop the damage, to decrease cost in your recovery. And then you also want to close the holes that allowed the ransomware to get into you in the first place. And you need to figure out, how did it come through? Did it come through social engineering, unpatched software, bad passwords, unpatched RDP, USB key? it is essential that you close the vulnerabilities and holes in your network, even the human firewall part of it, because many companies that got rid of ransomware only got hit again a second or a third time, and each time it seems to be worse. Because they thought that they're like, hey, I remediated this, I stopped the spread, I stopped the damage, I did the recovery, and then they just get hit again. And it's, again, because they didn't close the vulnerabilities and holes in their network. So it needs to be a combination of all three of these things. This is what you got to think in your head. I'm trying to stop the spread, stop the damage, which many times are one and the same thing, and then close the holes that allowed it to get in here in the first place so it doesn't come back to haunt me. CISA says, hey, this is what you should do if you get hit. Don't let a bad day get worse. I love CISA and the language they use with like, hey, ask for help. You can contact us, contact the FBI, the Secret Service, work with an experienced advisor to help you recover from a cyber attack. That is, you don't want to be working with a company that's never done it before. If you've never done it before, you want to work with, the doctor that has cut out 1,000 spleens. I don't want to work with a doctor that's brand new out of med school. He may have the latest and greatest tips, but I'd rather have the guy that's cut out 1,000 spleens, been there, done that. And even the nurses that work for him say, if I had a kid that needed a spleen taken out, this is the doctor I would use. If you get hit by ransomware, you want to talk to an experienced advisor that has been there, done that in the ransomware world. I know many people that have worked on hundreds and thousands of ransomware recoveries. And I got to tell you, they've been there, done that. They are the calmest voice in the room. Their first job is usually calming people down that have been hit. And then CISA says, hey, isolate the infected systems. Again, that's cutting off the network, cutting off the internet. That's not always the best thing. There's actually some ransomware families where cutting the internet can actually hurt you worse. But in most of the cases, cutting the internet and the network is going to help you. And then figuring out how to phase your return to operations. You've also got to review the connections to any business relationships, customers, business vendors that touch your network. Because remember, they could even have those people's information. I would add employees. Right? They have customer partners, vendors. I would add employees, customers, partner, vendors that touch your network because they could have those people's information. And that means you're going to have to help them or at least reach out to them in some type of PR marketing strategy and then apply the business impact assessment findings to prioritize recovery. These are kind of general stuff, but I think it's good advice in a generalized way. I would say that everybody needs to have a ransomware response plan that they've practiced. And I would say one of the biggest mistakes I hear about most companies doing is they'll actually have a incident response plan, ransomware hits, and then somebody major on that team goes outside that plan. So they have this ransomware response plan or incident response plan. They've even practiced it. And then somebody on that team during the real event starts going outside that plan, and it ends up causing a problem or causes a media leak or something like that. You need to make sure that your ransomware incident response plan is known, documented practice, and everybody understands not to deviate from the plan, right? So you need to have one, you need to practice it, and you need to tell people how important it is. Certainly when you're hit by ransomware, you're going to notify management that you're hit by ransomware. Get legal involved. Most people don't do this, but if you have to contact anybody externally, you want to have your lawyers that know the situation that then make all outside calls, because that means that everything legal does, even to your incident response folks, to your IT recovery folks, any call that legal makes is now protected communications with lawyers and cannot as easily be called into a courtroom. And for a lot of companies, this could be the difference between a little bit of damage and a lot of damage. So make sure you get the legal people involved. Let management know you're going to do this. Let your legal team know that you're going to do this, so that they're ready and prepared for when this happens. But one of the best things you can do is get a lawyer involved and let them make all the calls to outside vendors. It's kind of a weird thing, but that's just the way our system works. Again, you may probably want to freeze all internet access and or network access. That can be difficult if you don't know all the ways internet gets into your organization. If you have cybersecurity insurance, call the insurance company, let them know. They'll use it and tell you to call an incident response broker, experts. I got to say, the experts that the cybersecurity insurance world works with are usually pretty good. And when they tell you go call this person, it's usually a good thing to go call. You also want to identify the ransomware strain. So anything that gives you an idea, if you can somehow find out on the internet what this is, so that you can tell the experts what they're going to ask you, do you know what the ransomware strain is? It's one of the first questions the experts are going to ask you. And if you don't know, they're going to work to try to get that answer, because there are some ransomware gangs that are easy to deal with, some that aren't. There's some that the ransomware software is very terrible, and even if you pay the ransom, you don't get your stuff back. All kinds of questions like that, and that all begins with identifying the ransomware strain. Decide ahead of time whether or not you're going to pay the ransom. A lot of companies are like, we will never pay the ransom. Well, it's one thing to say that morally, and then to know that all your emails are just getting ready to be released out on the internet. I don't know any company that wants all their emails off, from their company released to the world, but that's what can happen. Also, even though data exfiltration is over 70%, involved in over 70% of all ransomware attacks, sometimes ransomware gangs that don't exfiltrate data claim that they do have your data. So make sure you ask for verification first. A lot of the gangs will automatically send data to you. Will go, hey, here's some of your spreadsheets or PDF files. Like they'll save you time and tell you, here's examples of your data that we have, so you don't have to ask them. But if they claim they have your data, before you pay them, make sure that that they actually have your data. The same thing with any time you pay the ransom, you're going to say, I'm going to give you part of the money, show me that your decryption key works. That's the way it works in negotiations. You don't give all your money up front. You don't trust them. They're criminals. But you're going to say, trust but verify. We just need to make sure before I pay you the money or all the money that you have these things, you do what you're promising. And if they say that they're going to delete your data after you've paid, make sure that they've deleted your data. A lot of times they don't delete the data. They're on to the next big thing. So you got to tell them, hey, I'm going to pay you, but I need to know that you deleted this data. It sounds crazy. Maybe they copied it somewhere else, but at least you want to say, where you have your data, I need you to show me that you have the data there. At least I can see that it's there, and I need to see that it's deleted. Instead of, because again, they get lazy sometimes, they'll leave the data there and then somebody else can see it. Also, make sure, again, you need to, almost every ransomware gang is used to talking to negotiators. These are professional negotiators that will help you understand how the negotiations are going to go and how much you're going to have to pay up front and all that stuff. Never pay all the money up front. Ask for proof that the decryption key will work and that the data, they can have access to the data. Consider hiring a professional ransomware negotiator like Coveware is an entire company dedicated. There are people around this world that all they do are professional ransomware negotiators. These are good people to be aligned with. Also think about it from a public relations standpoint. You got to have a ransomware PR plan in place, especially if they've got your employee data and your customer data, or they're attacking other customers and people that work through it there. You have to think, you want your PR team ahead of time to be aware of, how am I going to respond if we get hit by ransomware? You don't want to be thinking about how you're going to respond to something or whether you're going to pay the ransom when you're in the middle of a ransomware response. The CISA talks about, hey, it's good to get us involved and consider calling the FBI and the Secret Service. It can be great, but I do want to tell you, this is what CISA recommends, that you call them, the FBI and the Secret Service. Again, it could be a great thing, but recognize these are law enforcement agencies, and there's a chance that they can take over what you're doing and tell you what to do and how to do it. I have heard of cases where the FBI and the Secret Service have seized assets, and literally the people could no longer use those assets, and they didn't get them back for years. Most of the time, that is not what happens. But when you call in law enforcement, they may not do everything that you thought they were going to do. They may do more than what you thought they would do. So certainly, make sure, ask management. Management should make the determination about whether or not to get FBI and Secret Service. They can be an incredible resource. They are an incredible resource most of the time, but just know that you're taking a slight risk that it can get out of your control once you invite these outside entities in. So let management make that. I'm also a big believer in cybersecurity insurance. I used to not believe in it at all. I thought it was a scam, but now I think it's a really good thing. It's fairly low cost insurance for the financial risk that they cover. You're limited to your deductible, at least financially, and just make sure that they don't try. I've seen policies that say, well, if social engineering is involved or your end user was involved in this, we'll only cover 1/5 as much. Well, since most ransomware occurs because of social engineering. You don't want that type of exclusionary clause. Make sure you clarify ahead of time with the insurance company who's ultimately in charge of the response and who makes the ransom decision. Find out who is the ransomware expert they're going to call on in. Call that person ahead of time, introduce yourself, establish a relationship, find out how it's going to go, document how it's going to go. That's one of the best things you can do. Very few people actually call this incident response person ahead of time to just even ask, hey, what phone number do I call? What is the process going to be like? That is one of the best things you can do to help recover your company fast. But on top of that, last thing I want to leave you with is that most ransomware is in companies months to over a year, and they're not detected by any antivirus endpoint detection response software. So I'm going to give you a way to detect the ransomware program no matter how secretive it is. I'm going to give you, it's not really a secret, but it is an interesting trick that can significantly help you. And this is what you do. You want to determine, you want to detect your malware, any malware, the ransomware. You want to detect it as soon as it gets executed, right? And the sooner you detect it, the better it is, because the biggest risk for malware is when it's undetected. The time between when the ransomware or the malware executes and then you detect it is called dwell time. And when undetected, the malware and hackers related to it can be doing anything, and the risk increases over time, right? If the malware is only in for a minute, not a big deal. If it's in there for a year, probably a big deal. So the average ransomware program dwells from 8 months to a year without being detected. So we're going to talk about how to do it. Here's the secret. The trick is use an application control program, or really any program that can detect brand new, previously unknown executions. If you have Windows comes with one called AppLocker, an application control program, but you can use CrowdStrike, you can use Microsoft Advanced Threat Persistence. You just need to have a computer security program that can detect brand new executions that were not already legitimate allowed executions. So I'm a big fan about using an application control program. That's, some people know them as whitelisting, blacklisting programs, and audit-only mode. So most people, when they hear about application control programs, think about it as, hey, I'm going to stop this program or allow this program. And that's okay. That actually is one of the best things you can do to decrease your overall risk. But most people, most companies aren't prepared to handle that sort of application control. So what I'm saying is use an application control program in audit-only mode or monitoring-only mode, where you say, hey, if a new execution happens, then I want you to alert me. That's what I want to do. So with application control programs, you can create this baseline. You can do the snapshot on a clean image, and then the only thing that gets reported into the event log are brand new executions that were not in the baseline. So that's what, and I say take any new executions, put them to a centralized database, and then have a program and/or person research them. So again, put an application control program on every system, turn it on an audit-only mode, and then research any and all new executions. Let me say, early on, it's going to be a lot, because there's a lot of new people are downloading just, weird things, in Spotify and, ShareBear or BearShare. And there's people downloading legitimate stuff. At least it's not malicious stuff, not intentionally malicious stuff all the time. And you're not going to always know what's malicious or not malicious, even if it's called Spotify.exe. Is it really the real Spotify, But if you want to detect any new malware, then you've got to detect brand new stuff. You've got to look into anything that's brand new that you didn't previously allow, but you can create reports and automated security workflows from that information. So again, application control programs, they're called whitelisting or blacklisting. They allow you to control what does or doesn't run, or you can monitor it, and you can do monitoring audit only versus blocking and enforcement. That's what most people, when they're thinking of AppLocker or application control programs, are thinking about it in blocking or enforcement mode. I'm saying audit only mode. And then again, you can snapshot a system, and then again, it will write events to the security log when new executions occur that were not on the baseline, and then you can research it. Windows has come with AppLocker since Windows 8 or 10. They also have a kind of a more strict version of it called Windows Defender Application Control. Windows Defender Application Control is a different program, significantly I don't know, is it harsher or stricter in what is or isn't allowed to run? It's a little bit harder. AppLocker, almost anybody can run. Windows Defender Application Control takes a lot more research and management and stuff, but they've been on Windows, both of those, at least since Windows 10. Most major antivirus programs also have application control programs. Beyond Trust does, Carbon Black does. Tripwire is one of the original ones, even in Linux and Unix and Apple decades ago. Cisco has one. Avanti has one. There's many systems that have these application control programs, or you can do CrowdStrike or something like that. That's not necessarily application control, but it could be used that way. But certainly it can tell you about new executions. There's open source versions for Linux. SE Linux is one where you can build App Honor, App Armor, or FA Policy Daemon. I got to tell you, I'm not impressed with any of the Linux versions except for maybe Tripwire. Tripwire is a commercial thing, but the open source versions that come on Linux really don't do a great job, and it takes a lot of finagling, even more so. I actually like open source. I'm a big fan of FreeBSD and other things. But I'm not a fan of the application control programs, the free ones that are in there. So you may want to buy a commercial version. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, even has a guide to whitelisting you can read. I think it's only like 8 pages long. It's pretty quick to get through. But AppLocker has been on since Windows 7, Windows Server 2008, and you can turn it on and configure it with standalone or group policy or Intune. If you do it standalone, you go to group gpedit.msc, security setting. You go computer configuration, security settings, application control policies, and then you have all these rules you can turn on, executable rules, Windows installer rules, script rules, package, application rules for modern applications, and you enable them all. And then you can say, hey, I want you to run, you turn on these rules, but you want them in audit-only mode. That's the big thing. Hey, audit-only mode. And then you can say automatically generate rules. This is kind of setting that baseline. That's what this will look at the current system, generate all the rules for all the existing executables. So you only want to run this on the system that you know is clean and has the software you want. And then you can tell it, yes, run the rules. I want it to run on everything from the root directory C: on down. We'll call it baseline rules in this case. It runs. Different application control programs identify the programs differently based upon digital signature or file type or size or location. But you give it a minute or two, and then AppLocker will say, hey, here's the 2,600 rules, and do you want me to create them? Yes, create them. And then AppLocker will say, do you want me to create the default rules now? We say no, and that's if you do audit-only mode. If you did enforcement mode, you would say yes. Anyways, then it creates all these rules, these 2,600 rules, and then it will create, then you have to turn it on. You have to go into services and find the AppLocker. It's called Application Identity, App ID service, and turn it on, and that turns on AppLocker. And then again, anytime there is a new execution, it will create this 8003 event. In this example here, actually, I downloaded new ransomware. I went to a site called malshare.com. Don't go there unless you're allowed to go there, because that has real malware. But I went to malshare.com. I downloaded a common ransomware program that when you run it, it locks up your computer. Oh my God. And asks for a ransom. But the reality behind the scenes, it was installing this program called Client Server Runtime. I'm running a Windows Process Explorer here from SysInternals, which is a Microsoft subsidiary. And it was telling me, hey, there's this new fake Trojan program that Client Server Runtime. I may not know whether that's bad or not, although when I submitted it to VirusTotal, you can submit any running executable to VirusTotal in Process Explorer. 58 of the 72 antivirus engines said, hey, this is malware. Well, let's assume that you didn't know that maybe you had one of the 28 or whatever that didn't recognize it. It still wrote in AppLocker an 8003 event. So you get this 8003 event that gets sent to this database, and you have a person or team that researches any new executables, and when they're approved, they add it so it doesn't create an 8003 event anymore. But anytime a new executable is detected, somebody researches the executable. You can even have automatic mitigation that that, using a program or something that does the research for you. Maybe you contact the end user to go, hey, we saw this new executable. Do you know what that is? And then you can even develop security workflows, and anytime you get a new executable, you try to identify the executable that's involved. You can submit it to like Google's Virus Total or your antivirus vendor for analysis. You can run it in a detonation sandbox to see what that executable tries to do. You can even send an email to your end user to say, hey, did you know you did this or why you did this? And then ultimately you resolve it as benign or malicious. Here you could, as a workflow, auto-generate an email that goes, hey, Roger, we found this new execution we've never seen before, Spotify.exe. It was on your laptop and it was executed at this time and this day and you were logged in. Did you mean to do this? And maybe I would respond, yeah, I was installing Spotify for the first time. And the IT team could, decide whether they're going to allow it or not allow it. And really the best thing you could do is eventually end up creating this risk score that you assign to different users and workstations based upon the programs that they're running that show up as new executables, and then track those risk scores over time. And know before we have something called the virtual risk auditor that you can actually apply to every user, and you could actually increase, if you wanted to, you could increase the risk score of end users that seem to be installing a lot of new executables, and you could actually track over time whether or not they had higher risk or lower risk. And really more importantly is probably what you want to do is ultimately tie back. If you find malware, you need to figure out how did that malware get into Roger's workstation, and then modify your preventative controls and defenses and training so it's not able to do it again. That's ultimately what you want to do. Of course, at Know Before, we're big believers in that you should train your end users and then do simulated phishing tests, because when you do that, you significantly reduce the percentage of your employees that will automatically click on a phishing link. With that said, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. I don't have any time to take questions here, but if you email me at rogerg@knowbefore.com, like you see on your screen there, rogerg@knowbefore.com, I promise I will respond to your question within 24 hours. And again, you can follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. With that said, thanks for joining me for the last hour. I hope I've given you at least a couple of useful pieces of information. Thanks and have a good day.